Welcome to Race to the Finish. In this series, we will take a look at some of the thrilling, down-to-the-wire playoff races in the wildcard era. The criteria for the playoff races that I will cover goes as follows. There must be at least 3 teams involved in the race, and the featured teams can't have clinched a playoff spot until the final day of the season. There might be a couple exceptions to that later on in the series, but we'll cross that road when we get there. Now, on to episode 5. The turn of the century saw some fresh faces atop of the American League standings. While the 2-time defending World Series champion Yankees were leading the AL East, the Chicago White Sox, who hadn't made the playoffs in 7 years, had the best record in the AL. The Boston Red Sox and Texas Rangers, each of whom had made the playoffs the previous 2 seasons, were outside of a playoff spot. The Seattle Mariners hadn't made the playoffs since losing in the ALDS in 1997. They had finished the previous 2 seasons under 500 after finishing with 3 consecutive winning seasons from 95 to 97. In the offseason, they traded away pending free agent Ken Griffey Jr. for Mike Cameron, Brett Tomko, and 2 minor leaguers. They spent most of the summer and second half leading the AL West and opened up as much as a 7-game division lead over the Athletics on August 11th. However, the team endured a 3-14 stretch to close out August, shrinking the division lead to just 1.5 games on Labor Day. The Oakland Athletics hadn't made the playoffs since losing in the ALCS in 1992. Gone were the days of the Bash Brothers and other stars of the early 90s. In fact, 1999 saw their first winning season since 92. They spent most of the summer of 2000 in the wildcard lead, just a few games back of the Mariners in the AL West. However, just as the Mariners slumped in August, so did the A's, going on an 8-17 stretch, giving up the wildcard spot at the beginning of September. The Cleveland Indians had won the AL Central the previous 5 seasons, but this year the White Sox had taken control of the division. They were 10 games over 500 and just 2 back of the Sox in the division in early June, but star slugger Manny Ramirez went down with an injury, missing nearly 40 games, and they went cold the rest of the month and found themselves 11.5 back in the division and only 1 game over 500 in early July. However, they got their act together in August and retook the wildcard lead towards the end of the month. It's Sunday, September 10th. The Indians and White Sox have split the first 2 games of a 3-game series, but the rubber match was rained out, with a makeup game to be determined later. The Athletics, after defeating the lowly Devil Rays 10-0 the previous day thanks to a Tim Hudson complete game, blanked the D-Rays again 11-0 thanks to another complete game shutout, this time from Barry Zito. In Seattle, the Mariners took 2 out of 3 from the Twins thanks to a 6-run third, which included a 3-run homer from A-Rod and Jay Buhner. After Sunday's results, the A's stayed 2 back of the Mariners and Indians each for the division and wild card respectively. On Monday night, with the Indians off, the A's looked to take 3 out of 4 from the Devil Rays. They were tied 1-1 in the 8th until the A's scored 4 runs that inning and won 5-1. Up in Seattle, the Mariners dropped the series opener to the Royals 6-3, closing the gap to just 1 game in the AL West. On Tuesday, the Indians welcomed the Red Sox to town for 3, who were also not far behind in the wildcard race. The Red Sox scored 6 runs in the third off Indian starter Chuck Finley and held on for an 8-6 victory. The A's welcomed the last-place Twins to town for a quick 2-game series, and the A's won their 4th in a row by the score of 5-3, thanks to 2 home runs from Jason Giambi. The Indians' wildcard lead was now down to just half a game. The Mariners maintained their division lead with an 11-3 win over the Royals. On Wednesday, the A's had to settle for a series split as the Twins scored 2 unearned runs in a 7-6 victory. Later that night, the Indians crushed the Red Sox 10-3, and the Mariners and Royals were tied 1-1 in the bottom of the 11th when Jay Buhner came up with Mike Cameron on first.
Himself an everyday player away from him. That is down the line and fair into the corner. Cameron heading for third, way caught by Larry Boa. Here comes the throw. Cameron is safe and the Mariners win it. Jay Buhner is the hero. He drives in both Seattle runs as they take a 2-game lead in the West over Oakland. And Greg Zahn has to be restrained from Marvin Hudson. Victory noogies for Jay Buhner. Zahn was sure he had Cameron nailed.
Seems like the home plate umpire wanted to go home. It was not a great day for the A's as they lost ground in both the wild card and division. On Thursday, with the two AL West teams off, the Indians lost the series finale to the Red Sox 7-4. The Tribe held a one-game lead over the A's and a two-game lead over the Red Sox in the wild card standings entering the weekend. Both AL West teams traveled to the East Coast, and both teams routed their opponents in their series opener. The Mariners defeated the Orioles 10-2, and the A's crushed the Devil Rays 17-3. The Indians traveled to the Bronx to face the AL East leading Yankees, and they took care of business with an 11-1 victory. On Saturday, the Yankees took the second game of the series with a 6-3 victory. The A's took their middle game of the series with a 5-2 victory, and the Mariners crushed the Orioles again, this time 14-0. The A's and Indians were now tied for the wild card with just over 2 weeks to play. On Sunday, the Indians crushed the Yankees again with a 15-4 victory. The Mariners swept the Orioles thanks to a go-ahead two-run homer from A-Rod in the 8th to give the M's a 3-2 win. The A's Devil Rays game was postponed due to Hurricane Gordon incoming, and the A's had to get out of town to Baltimore by Monday. Since the A's did not have any off days left, and the D-Rays were not going to be anywhere near the A's on their off days, this game will be made up on Monday, October 2nd, if it will have any impact on the standings. The Mariners and the A's swapped cities. The M's defeated the Devil Rays 4-2 in the series opener thanks to a 2-out RBI double from Stan Javier in the 9th. The A's crushed the Orioles 12-3 in their series opener. The Indians-Yankees series finale was a pitcher's duel between Bartolo Colon and Roger Clemens. Colon pitched a complete game shutout and the Indians won 2-0, taking 3 of 4 from the first-place Yankees and keeping their half-game wild-card lead. The Indians would now travel to Boston to take on the Red Sox to play 5 games in 3 days. This is because an entire series was rained out at Fenway Park back in late April. The Indians would not have any off days the rest of the season, and they weren't too thrilled when MLB announced that their postponed game against the White Sox from last week would be made up as part of a 3-team doubleheader on September 25th, with the Indians hosting the White Sox in Game 1 next Monday afternoon, and then hosting the Twins in a regularly scheduled game that evening. As a result, the Indians would play 16 games over their final 13 days of the regular season. Although it wasn't much better for the A's, who would play 14 over that same span, with no off days as well. On Tuesday afternoon, the A's trailed the Orioles 4-2 entering the 7th, but the A's scored 5 times that inning thanks to 3 bases-loaded walks, and the A's won 7-4. That night, Indians starter Charles Nagy didn't make it out of the 4th, and the Red Sox took Game 1 from the Indians by an identical 7-4 final. Down in St. Pete, the Mariners took Game 2 from the D-Rays with a 5-2 victory. The Athletics had now taken first place in the wild card over the Indians for the first time since August 25th, 25 days earlier. The Red Sox still had a chance at 2.5 back. On Wednesday, both the A's and Indians would play doubleheaders. The Orioles took Game 1 from the A's. All it took was a 2-run homer from Brooke Fordyce in the 4th inning, and the Orioles held on for a 2-0 victory. In Boston, Steve Woodard outdueled Pedro Martinez, and a Kenny Lofton homer in the 9th gave the Indians a 2-0 lead. The Red Sox threatened in the bottom of the 9th, and had the tying run at 3rd with 1 out, but closer Bob Wickman was able to get out of the jam and preserve the victory in Game 1 for the Tribe. In the nightcaps, the A's took the series from the Orioles with a 4-0 shutout, with starter Gil Heredia lasting into the 8th. At Fenway, the Indians trailed 3-0 in the 5th, but scored thrice to tie the game, including this Omar Vizquel steal of home. After the Red Sox retook the lead, the Indians scored twice more in the 7th on back-to-back RBI singles from Manny Ramirez and Jim Thome and held on for a 5-4 victory. Down in St. Pete, the Mariners swept the Devil Rays, winning their 8th in a row. They scored 4 in the 2nd and also held on for a 5-4 victory. The Mariners now had a 3-game lead in the division over the A's, who had now fallen half a game back to the Indians for the wild card with just a week and a half to go. The A's would now travel to Seattle to take on the Mariners in a critical 4-game series. Both teams are on a roll, with the A's having won 9 of their last 11, and the Mariners having won their last 8 in a row, and 10 of their last 11. On Thursday, the Indians and Red Sox played their second consecutive doubleheader. The Indians struck for 7 runs in the first inning off starter Rolando Araujo, before the Red Sox even came out to bat. However, the home team clawed their way back, scoring 2 in the bottom of the first, and chased starter Jason Baer before he could record an out in the third. A Troy O'Leary 3-run homer tied it in the third, then Justin Spire walked Jose Offerman with the bases loaded to give the Red Sox the lead. The Sox ended up winning 9-8 as their bullpen only allowed 1 run over 8 1/3 innings. It was a crushing loss and certainly a missed opportunity for the Indians, who now fell back into a tie for the wild card for the time being. In the nightcap, though, the Indians got their revenge, scoring 6 runs in the 7th en route to an 8-5 victory, taking the 5-game series from the Red Sox. That night, in Seattle, the A's scored 4 runs off Jamie Moyer in the 6th en route to a 5-2 victory, remaining tied with the Indians and closing the gap in the division to just 2 games, ending the Mariners' 8-game winning streak. On Friday, the Indians played their first of their 3-game series in Kansas City. They scored twice in the second but were unable to score the rest of the game, and Greg Zahn hit a go-ahead solo shot for the Royals in the 8th to give them a 3-2 victory. Later that night in Seattle, the A's scored 5 in the first off starter Freddie Garcia en route to an 8-3 victory, taking a full game lead in the wild card and closing the gap in the division to just 1 game. This was the first time that the A's had a lead this large in the wildcard standings since August 20th, a month earlier. On Saturday afternoon, the A's and the Mariners were tied 2-2 in the 7th, but they scored 6 times off Mariners relievers, including a Ben Grieve grand slam, and the A's won 8-2, taking the first 3 of the 4-game series. They have now won 12 of their last 14 and tied the Mariners for first place in the AL West. The last time they were in first place was on June 28th, nearly 3 months prior. That night, Bartolo Colon pitched 7 shutout innings, and the Indians beat the Royals 11-1 to remain a game back of the A's in the wild card. On Sunday, Indians starter Charles Nagy was rocked again, as Blake Stein and the Royals blanked the Tribe 9-0. It was yet another missed opportunity for the Indians, losing 2 of 3 to a team 10 games under 500. In Seattle, the Mariners avoided the 4-game sweep and retook the division lead with a 3-2 victory. The Mariners were only 4-9 against the A's that year, so it must have felt refreshing to keep the division lead at the end of the series. It was still a very successful weekend for the A's. With 1 week to go, the Mariners led the A's by 1 game in the division, and the A's led the Indians by 1 game in the wild card. Both the A's and Indians would head home for the last week of the season. On Monday, the Indians played their final doubleheader of the season. This was the aforementioned quirky 3-team doubleheader. I realize this is 24 years later and hindsight is 2020, but I feel like there were better options than to reschedule this game as part of a 2-team doubleheader. For example, the Indians had the Monday following the originally scheduled game off, meaning they could have postponed it just 1 day until September 11th and moved the White Sox-Tigers game from that day until Thursday, September 14th, which both teams had off. Or they could have rescheduled it for September 25th, as they did, and moved Game 1 of the Twins-Indians series from that night until the following afternoon, meaning both teams would play a doubleheader on Tuesday, which would have been more fair. Or they could have waited until the end of the regular season to see if the game would have been necessary and play it on Monday, October 2nd, like MLB decided to do with the A's and Devil Rays. In the first game against the White Sox on Monday afternoon, the Tribe trailed 2-1 in the 5th, but scored 5 times that inning, and 3 more in the 6th, and cruised to a 9-2 victory. The White Sox had just clinched the division the day before and were resting some of their starters. In the nightcap against the Twins, the Indians led 3-0 early thanks to a Manny Ramirez home run and led 3-1 into the 8th. The Indians were playing their 3rd doubleheader in 6 days and 17th game in 14 days, and the bullpen was overworked. In the top of the 8th, reliever Paul Shuey allowed back-to-back singles to start off the inning. After getting the next 2 guys out, he walked Corey Kosky to load the bases. Bob Wickman came in for the 4-out save, but allowed back-to-back singles to Torrey Hunter and Jock Jones to give the Twins a 4-3 lead, and the score that they would win by. With the Mariners off, the A's looked to get within half a game in the division. They scored 4 runs in the second in their series opener against the Angels, thanks to a Jason Jalmy bases-clearing triple. He and Eric Chavez each hit home runs, although closer Jason Isringhausen ran into trouble in the ninth. The A's secured the 7-5 victory to take a 1.5-game lead in the wildcard and get within half the game of the Mariners. This was the first time the Indians had trailed by more than 1 game in the wildcard since August 18th, over a month prior. On Tuesday, the Indians got back on the winning side. Chuck Finley went 7 strong, allowing only 2 runs, and Jim Thome's go-ahead single in the 6th put the Tribe up for good as they won 4-2. That night in Oakland, the Angels scored 2 runs in the first off Tim Hudson, but the A's answered with 5 in the bottom half of the inning, including 2 bases-loaded walks off Scott Schoenweiss, and cruised to a 10-3 victory to keep their wild-card lead at 1.5 games. Up in Seattle, the Mariners kept their division lead as Aaron Seeley pitched a complete game shutout and the M's won 5-0. The standings remained the same. On Wednesday, the A's and Angels played a day game at the Coliseum, and it was a wild one. Each team scored twice in the first inning, and the A's chased Angels starter Al Levine with 3 more in the second. The Angels tied it in the 5th, but Terrence Long answered with a 2-run shot to give the A's the lead back, and they held on for a 9-7 victory, their 15th in their last 18 games. That night in Cleveland, Manny Ramirez hit his 35th home run of the season, a 2-run shot, in the first inning, and the Indians added 5 more in the 4th off starter Brad Radke, and the Tribe won 8-2, keeping pace with the A's. Up in Seattle, David Bell broke a 2-2 tie with a leadoff homer in the 4th, and the Mariners held on to win 6-4, keeping their division lead. Again, the standings remained unchanged. On Thursday, the A's and Angels played a day game. The Angels, looking to avoid the 4-game sweep, led 3-0 at one point, but the A's came back to tie it. That score remained all the way into the 14th inning when Troy Glaus hit a leadoff homer off Scott Service. No, not that Scott Service. Orlando Palmeiro added a 2-run double, and Troy Percival got the save, and the Angels gave the Indians and Mariners some help. Around the time that the A's game went to extras, the Mariners and Rangers began their series finale. Jamie Moyer was chased after allowing 4 runs in less than 2 innings, but the Mariners scored 5 in the 3rd to retake the lead. That was short-lived though, as the Rangers scored 2 in the 5th and 4 in the 6th, and just like the Angels earlier in the day, they played spoiler as well in a 13-6 victory. Knowing that both teams ahead of them had lost, the Indians looked to close the gap that night against the Twins. They got off to a good start as Jim Thome hit his 35th home run of the season in the 2nd to give the Tribe a 2-0 lead. However, the Twins, looking to play spoiler, scored 3 times off Bartolo Colon in the 4th to take a 3-2 lead. That score lasted into the bottom of the 9th, when Travis Fryman hit the very first pitch of the inning, just barely over the wall and left to tie the game at 3. It was initially ruled a double, but called a home run upon a discussion from the umpires. In the 10th, with the bases loaded and 1 out, the Indians were unable to turn a double play on this Corey Kosky ground ball, and in the bottom of the inning, with the tying run at 3rd, Manny Ramirez grounded into a fielder's choice to end the game. It was a missed opportunity for the Indians. Both teams ahead of them had lost, and all they could do was split a 4-game series with a team 21 games under 500. In fact, the Indians went 5-8 against the Twins that year and had a losing record against every team in the AL Central. 3 of those 4 teams finished under 500. In the final weekend of the season, the Indians not only needed to win, but they needed help from either the Angels or the Rangers, who would be facing the Mariners and A's respectively. The Indians welcomed the Blue Jays to the Jake for 3 games. The Jays led the AL East as late as July 6th and were only 1.5 back of Cleveland for the wild card on September 2nd, but had a subpar July and mediocre September, taking them out of playoff contention. On Friday night, the Blue Jays, now playing spoiler, jumped out to a 4-0 lead in the 2nd, knocking starter Dave Verba out of the game thanks to solo shots from Todd Green and Alex Gonzalez. However, the Indians, who were playing desperate, cut the deficit in half on a 2-run homer from Jim Thome, and Kenny Lofton tied the game on a 2-run single. The Tribe chased Jays starter Steve Traxel in the 3rd inning and took the lead on a Travis Fryman sac fly. Manny Ramirez put the Indians up by 3 with a 2-run shot in the 5th. David Segui added a leadoff homer in the 6th to add some insurance, and the Indians' bullpen held the Blue Jays scoreless, winning 8-4. Now, they needed some help. It was looking good for the Tribe out in California. Down in Anaheim, the Mariners scored 2 unearned runs in the top of the first, but the Angels came right back with 4 in the bottom of the inning, thanks to a 3-run homer from Troy Glaus. Benji Molina added a 3-run homer in the third to extend the Angels' lead to 7-3. Up in Oakland, the Rangers led the A's 2-0 in the fourth until Jason Giambi hit his 42nd homer of the year to cut the deficit in half. The A's later tied it that inning with a bases-loaded groundout from Eric Chavez. The A's took the lead in the bottom of the sixth with a 2-run single from Randy Velarde. Down in Anaheim, Garrett Anderson added another home, and the Angels won 9-3, giving the Indians their much-needed help. Up in Oakland, the Rangers were threatening, down by 2 in the 8th, but Randy Velarde made a sensational stop off Chad Curtis to limit the damage. The A's went on to win 7-5. This was the first time since June 28th that the A's had sole possession of first place in the division, and the Mariners were in second. The M's had spent the last 93 days at least tied atop the AL West, and now they led the wild card by only 1 game with 2 games to go.
September Saturday, the final Saturday of the regular season. It's time for Fox Saturday Baseball's Game of the Week, and a huge game today at sold-out Jacobs Field in Cleveland, Ohio, where the Toronto Blue Jays breeze in from the Great White North and try to frost the Indians' postseason hopes. The Indians with 2.
On Saturday, the Indians played first again. It remained a scoreless affair between Chuck Finley and Esteban Loaiza until the 5th inning, when Alberto Castillo doubled home Craig Graybeck to give the Blue Jays a 1-0 lead. However, that lead did not last long, as in the bottom half of the inning, Sandy Alomar singled home human piece of shit Russell Branyan to tie the game at 1. In the 6th, with runners on the corners and no one out, Jim Thome hit a sharp grounder to first, and all Carlos Delgado could do was knock the ball down and keep it in front of him, scoring Roberto Alomar for third. After a single and a walk, Loaiza was pulled for Kelvin Escobar, who walked Branyan with the bases loaded to give the Indians another run. With the bases still loaded, Sandy Alomar looked to extend the lead.
This ball if he can.
1-0. Chop toward third. Batista's coming home first. There's one throw. Back to first. Not in time. Ball dropped. Hannah runs going to score. Segui trots home. Cabrera all the way around toward third.
I can just imagine today that Alomar would have been called out for running inside the base path. Or is it the baseline? Anyways, Finley was pulled after allowing the first 2 men to reach in 7th, leaving the game in the hands of the Indians bullpen, which has been shaky all September.
3-1. Ball 4, 2 on, nobody out. Tying run, there's nobody out in the 7th, and a rocket hit to right field for a hit. Here comes Green around third. They'll wave him. Indians concede the run. They're at the corners. Nobody out in the game. 4-2 now. 7. Hot shot toward third. Second base 1. First base. Close play. Not in time. RBI for Stewart. It's a 4-3 game.
However, Shuey recovered by striking out Alex Gonzalez and getting Dave Martinez to ground out, holding the lead at 1. In the bottom of the 7th, Roberto Alomar and Manny Ramirez hit back-to-back homers to get those 2 runs back, carrying a 6-3 lead into the 8th. Ricardo Rincon came on, but was pulled after allowing a leadoff double to Delgado. Steve Carce came on, and after retiring Tony Bautista, he allowed an RBI triple to Jose Cruz Jr., scoring Delgado. The next man up, Todd Green, singled home Cruz, and it was a 1-run game again. Steve Reed relieved Carce and got Graybeck to ground out, but that put the tying run in scoring position. Reed left after just 1 batter, and Cameron Cairncross came in, and he got Darren Fletcher to also ground out to first to end the threat, again holding on to a 1-run lead. Bob Wickman, who allowed the game-winning run on Thursday against the Twins, came on for the save, but it was not going to be easy. Alex Gonzalez had a 1-out double, and the tying run was in scoring position. Wickman got Dave Martinez to ground out to the left side, holding Gonzalez at second. After intentionally walking Delgado, Tony Bautista grounded into a fielder's choice to end the ballgame. The Indians were within half a game of the Mariners for the moment, and were keeping pressure on both the M's and the A's. Could they get some help like they did the night before? Unfortunately for the Tribe, the Mariners jumped out to a 2-0 lead in the first, and the A's scored 9 in the first inning. The A's hit 4 home runs en route to a 23-2 victory. The Mariners hit 5 home runs, including 2 from A-Rod, and they cruised to a 21-9 victory. The stage was now set for the final day of the regular season. The Athletics led the Mariners by half a game in the West, and the Mariners led the Indians by a game in the wild card. Here are the clinching scenarios. For the A's, it's simple: win and in, or an Indians loss. It's the same for the Mariners: win and in, or an Indians loss. The Indians needed to win and get some help, and this is where it gets a bit complicated. If the A's and Indians won, but the Mariners lost, then the Indians and Mariners would play a one-game playoff to determine the wild card on Monday in Seattle. If the Indians and Mariners won, but the A's lost, then the A's would have to fly across the country to Tampa Bay to make up that postponed game from 2 weeks ago. If the A's were to win that makeup game, then they would qualify for the playoffs as the AL West champions and the Mariners as the wild card. If the A's lost that makeup game, then the Mariners would win the AL West and the A's would fly back across the country to Oakland to face the Indians in a one-game playoff for the wild card on Tuesday. Perhaps the most confusing scenario would be if the Indians won, but the A's and Mariners both lost. In this scenario, the Mariners would play a play-in game on Tuesday, but the opponent would depend on the A's result in Tampa Bay. If the A's won that makeup game, they would win the West, and the Mariners would play the Indians in a play-in game in Seattle on Tuesday, but if the A's lost that game, Cleveland would win the wild card and the A's would fly back across the country to Seattle to play a one-game playoff for the AL West on Tuesday. If the Indians and A's lost but Mariners won, the latter two would qualify for the playoffs, but the A's would still need to fly to Tampa Bay since they won the season series over the Mariners but would have finished half a game behind them, needing to play a 162nd game for tiebreaker purposes. Got it? Good. The games on Sunday, October 1st were scheduled at the same time as the games the day before, with the Indians taking on the Blue Jays at 10 a.m. Pacific, and the A's and Mariners playing simultaneously at 1 p.m. Pacific. For the third straight game, the Blue Jays scored first, with an Alex Gonzalez 2-run shot in the first inning. The Indians got one back in the bottom half of the inning on a Roberto Alomar RBI single. In the second, Dave Martinez couldn't catch the fly ball, and the Indians scored 3 times that inning, 1 unearned. Jim Thome hit a 3-run shot in the third inning. Kenny Lofton hit a leadoff homer in the fourth, and Manny Ramirez, in what could have been his final at-bat as an Indian, hit a solo shot in the seventh. Sandy Alomar added a 2-run shot in the eighth, and the Indians won their season finale 11-4. They did all they could do in the final weekend, and now they would go to the clubhouse and hope for some help from either the Angels or the Rangers. Early on, it looked good for the Tribe, as the Angels scored twice in the first to take a 2-0 lead. But A-Rod hit a homer to lead off the fourth, and Mike Cameron hit a game-tying 2-out double in the fifth. Up in Oakland, it was scoreless into the fifth, but the Rangers had runners on second and third with 1 out, but Tim Hudson was able to get out of the jam. Back to Anaheim, the Angels loaded the bases with 2 outs in the sixth, but Arthur Rhodes came on to escape that jam. On the very next pitch of the game, David Bell hit a home run to lead off the 7th inning to give the Mariners a 3-2 lead. They added 2 more that inning on a Raul Ibanez 2-run double. In Oakland, the A's struck first on a Ramon Hernandez 2-out RBI single in the 7th, then Randy Velarde and Olmedo Saenz each hit solo shots in the 8th to give the A's a 3-0 lead. In the 9th, the Rangers brought the tying run to the plate.
Not a soul on his or her posterior right now. Everybody's standing. Izzy has the sign. He's ready. 1-2. Strike 3 called. The A's win the West. And here they come, pouring onto the field in the center of the diamond. Forget St. Petersburg and Tampa Bay. Look to next Tuesday here at the net. The celebration is on.
Down in Anaheim, Kazuhiro Sasaki got the save, and the Mariners had clinched the wild card, eliminating the Indians. The Tribe went 12-6 in their final 18 games, which is pretty good, until you realize they were outdone by the Mariners, who went 13-5, and the A's, who went 14-3. Their inability to win series against the sub-500 Royals and Twins in late September, and the fact that they had to play 3 doubleheaders, including one that could have been rescheduled differently, is what eventually did them in.